Hi, everybody, and welcome to Exegetically Speaking, a podcast of the friends and faculty of Wheaton College, Wheaton, Illinois, and the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, Texas. My name is David Capes, and I am the Senior Research Fellow at the Lanier Theological Library and a former dean up there in Wheaton at the School of Biblical and Theological Studies. Our purpose in these podcasts is really very simple. We want to promote the study of biblical languages, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, so we can read the Bible more faithfully, study it more fully, and not just read it, but to live it. Joining me today on Exegetically Speaking, Dr. Aubrey Buster, Assistant Professor of Old Testament at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. Dr. Buster, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, David.
It's great to see you again, even through the screen.
You as well.
Now, how long have you been at Wheaton?
This is the beginning of my third year.
And so crazy things are happening in higher ed these days with social distancing, masks. Trying to teach through a mask is not fun. I'm doing that right now, and it's not a lot of fun. Because I have long classes. My classes are 3 hours, something like that. So, anyway,
it's much more difficult.
Yeah, higher ed is going through a lot of big changes right now. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about the question of Moses. Did Moses have horns? And you know, there's all kind of reasons that we can talk about that. Well, it sounds a little strange, but maybe you've seen pictures of Moses coming down Mount Sinai with horns. So where does that come from, Dr. Buster?
Yes, and you did hear that correctly. We are asking if Moses has horns.
Yeah.
And so if you're turning up the volume on your iPod or whatever, that is correct. The most famous example of this, if you'd like an illustration, unfortunately we don't have an illustrated version of this podcast, but if you look up Michelangelo's Moses, you'll notice that he has horns. And the strange feature of this artwork might be due to a mistranslation of a Hebrew word.
Oh gosh, okay. And where is that Hebrew word mistranslated?
That's all right. This comes from Exodus 34:29, when Moses descends from Mount Sinai after his encounter with divine presence. The text reads that the skin of Moses's face, karan, and it is that verb that is in question here.
Okay.
So the verb karan is likely what's known as a denominative verb. So it's a verb that's related to a noun that exists. So we do this in English when we say things like I am adulting, right? That means I'm acting like an adult. That's a denominative verb. That's a neologism, right? A new denominative verb.
So it's like a noun that's been turned into a verb.
Exactly.
Right?
A noun that's been turned into a verb.
Right.
Because we do have a noun form, keren, that means horns most of the time. So oxen are described as having horns. David's horn is lifted up. And so it refers to those actual physical horns that animals had on their head, that gods were portrayed as having on their heads in the ancient Near East. But keren can also mean rays of light. So rays of radiance. So in Habakkuk 3:4, that same word keren is used, and it appears to be related to rays of light coming from God in that case. Now, this is the translational difficulty with Moses's face comes early on in the tradition. We already have disagreement between the Old Greek, which is Greek, a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, the Peshitta, which is a Syriac translation of the Hebrew Bible, and the Targumim, which is an Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Bible, all understand this verb to signify the radiance of Moses's face, as we have in most contemporary English translations.
Yeah.
Aquila, however, understood this verb as related to the noun keren for horns. And he was followed in his translation by Jerome, who translated the Vulgate, which was the most influential Christian translation for centuries.
Yeah, and that was into Latin at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. So Jerome translated the Hebrew Bible into Latin.
But he followed Aquila at that point.
He followed Aquila
who was in Greek, who was writing in
Greek.
Yeah.
Yes. And so he, in Christian tradition for several centuries, their Latin Bible clearly stated that Moses came down from Mount Sinai horned. And this is why he had to wear a veil.
That's why he wore a veil.
As you might do if you sprouted horns. And so it is this tradition that Michelangelo and others within that tradition follow by portraying Moses as having horns.
Yeah, there's other artwork I know that I've seen too, other than Michelangelo.
Yes.
And even sometimes modern Jewish people, they're asked, and I've talked to them before, and they've said to me that Christians sometimes want to know if Jews have horns. And I remember in one particular case, the fellow had long hair, and he was asked, pull back your hair and let me see your horns, because there was that thought that they did. So how did that develop? What happened there?
Unfortunately, this understanding that Moses had horns was connected to anti-Semitism that arose early on in the Christian tradition, in which horns became associated with iconography with the devil. And so when it was said in the Bible that Moses had horns and Moses was associated with the law and with Judaism generally, there was a tradition that arose that portrayed not only Moses, but also Jewish people as being characterized by horns. And this was part of an anti-Semitic negative understanding of Judaism. That it was just in conversation with you today that I heard that this has continued up until the modern period.
Yeah, I've heard people, Jewish people, tell me that, and it's probably been a few years, and maybe going into the next century, we won't have to worry about that, think about that.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so.
But as far as I know, Jews do not have horns. So stop it.
Stop it. Is absolutely correct.
Yeah.
That is absolutely correct.
Yeah. But Paul picks this up in the New Testament in 2 Corinthians 3, I think, where he talks about Moses coming down and his face was veiled. And then he goes on to talk about glory, which is this shining radiance there.
Which likely
the glory that was fading. He said he veiled because that glory was started fading rather than
clearly
increasing.
Paul is reading along with that other early tradition represented by the Old Greek translation that understood Moses' face as being radiant.
Radiant. Every language has homophones, right? Words that are spelled the same or at least sound the same.
Yes.
And choosing the right word in translation can make a big difference, obviously.
Yes, it can.
It can.
Yes, it can.
So Moses with his radiant face or Moses with his horns coming down Mount Sinai. Aubrey Buster, thanks for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking. Thanks to Silvio Vasquez, Rebecca Larson, and Krista Sanchez for helping us to produce this podcast. Thanks as well to Phil Keggy for our music. If you want to study biblical languages, the best place you could do that is Wheaton College. They have an amazing program, one of the best I've ever seen, whether you want to be a graduate or an undergraduate student. So go to the website, www.wheaton.edu, and look for modern and classical languages. Get started today. If you have questions or comments about this podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Contact us at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for listening.